very warm welcome to Sussex and the City, our second roundtable. We are looking this afternoon at the land, sea and environment story. This is being recorded, so if you don't want to appear on camera, that's absolutely fine, but we will share it as a resource afterwards. So those of you that have been following the Sussex and the City story so far will know that we are sorry, just a note there that there's a power cut in some parts of Brighton. So hopefully that's resolved quickly. Maybe that's quite relevant to this conversation when we think about infrastructure and utilities. Well, if that is causing people some issue, I'm sorry about that. Not much I can do, but we'll bear with you. But obviously we'll be sharing this afterwards. So Sussex and the City, what is it? Well, we are creating this non-political, independent, explorational, collaborative space to try and help us all really to navigate what the future of Sussex will be as powers from Whitehall are promised to be sent down regionally, that we will have an elected mayor by this time next year. And a big sort of recalibration of all the local authorities in the region. So, but rather than focusing too much on those technical changes, what we're really hoping to explore in these roundtables is a little bit more about the sort of psychological, the identity, the economic, and the sort of prosperity of thinking regionally about Sussex and Brighton. Acknowledging that a lot of it is very sort of carved up and fragmented at the moment. So, is there an opportunity with the regional view to perhaps do some things more boldly, more regionally, more joined up, but also being really cognizant of some of the challenges and risks that might come with that? So, we're looking at a number of different themes through these sessions. Very, very quickly on the project as a whole, for those of you that are slightly new to it. So we have a weekly podcast that comes out every Monday. So we're speaking to all sorts of different voices from across the region. There's a few examples here. So we're talking to politicians, we're talking to business leaders, we're talking to cultural leaders, we're talking to people in tech, we're talking to young people, we're talking to environmentalists, and to really try and get a sense of where people are at with their, thinking about who might be impacted by or who can impact what some of this change looks like. So please do subscribe to that if you haven't already. They're good fun. We have bulletins that go out every couple of days, sometimes daily, which is a real-time, pithy, short read that is intended to try and get people up to speed with things as they're sort of happening. So if there are reports coming out, if there are new updates on consultation, if there are examples from different sectors, or there are evolutions in the conversation that's happening locally, then we try and get those out to people as soon as we can. But they're very short read. And that mailing list is free to join, and more and more people are joining every day. So it's going out to lots and lots of people right across the region, and we're really happy with the engagement. So please do share it or join it if you haven't already. All of the information will be, it's all available at sussexandthecity.info. And these events, the roundtables exist because you're here at one, which is great. We have 3 more lined up this month. I'll give some more information about those at the end, but we're really open. This is the start of a conversation. We only have an hour today, so you will realise how little of the tip of the iceberg we get to touch on. So we're really keen to hear from you about how you would like further, more in-depth and follow-on ways to create these conversations. We've got lots of ideas, but this is all about how we listen to and learn from you as well. So be very keen to get your feedback. So before I move on, I want to talk a little bit about the Sussex and the City 100. So this is, as I said, it's a really collaborative project. We are working with and building a coalition of lots and lots and lots of organisations right across the region, businesses, charities, community groups, networks, Now, some are, giving time and resource and helping us get access to expertise and facilities to be able to do things properly, like podcasts. And some are very generously putting in a bit of money so that we can ensure that the project doesn't just sort of suddenly fall off a cliff when we, run out of capacity, and that we again can do it properly. We can make it accessible. We can make the resources free. Um, and it means, more importantly, I think, that there's a lot of people with skin in the game and that this is a shared project, co-owned, co-delivered. But we recognise not a lot of people have got a lot of time, so we can do the legwork. But if they can help, uh, you know, pay for an event, then that's really helpful. So lots of opportunity for organisations of all shapes and sizes to join the Sussex and the City 100. So if you would like more information on that, do get in touch with me. Okay, that's the overview over with. So we're going to be talking today about land, sea, and environment. So we've split that into three topic areas. Now I know that's a choice. There are many, many others, and like I said, we're only going to have a short amount of time to even deal with these. These are huge, huge areas, but I hope we will get enough of a kind of flavour of where people are at, looking at what is happening in other areas, and starting to think about what good looks like across Sussex and Brighton. So the three areas that I've split it down into is sort of planning, essentially, then sort of environment and nature, and then the third is kind of a little bit where the two come together. What's the tension? How do we look at growth? Because let's be clear, that's why devolution is happening, very much through a growth lens. But we also know that growth doesn't just mean GDP and GVA, especially in Sussex, which has such rich and vital blue and green ecological systems. So what we're looking at today is how do we, build community wealth and ensure prosperity at the same time as protecting, restoring, doing better with nature recovery. So that's what we're going to be thinking about today, and especially where different community voices sit within that, because this could be quite top down. So that I'm delighted to be joined by a rostra of really, really exciting voices in this space. So I hope to hear from all of you. But if we don't, then that's, like I said, it's not the end of the conversation. But those joining live, the way it's going to work today, I'm going to give a little bit of context about each of these areas, and then I'm going to call upon people that have come forward and said they'd love to ask a question or answer a question, and we'll have a little conversation about that around these themes. But I'd also like to create space for anyone that maybe hasn't put themselves forward but would like to be part of it to contribute. You are very, very welcome. Um, it's quite informal. Just kind of raise a hand or chip in if you want to say something. Um, or write a question in the chat, and then I can sort of call on you. Brilliant. Okay, so let's get started. So planning, a little bit of context. What do we know? What's the situation in Sussex? Again, this is a huge topic, so I've only distilled it down into sort of 8 things that I think are pretty critical when we think about regionally some of the planning opportunities and challenges. So housing is obviously a massive part of what we think about in terms of planning and land use. And we know that the government has been very clear about their ambitions to build 1.5 million new houses by the end of the Parliament. So what's that mean for this region? Well, the City of Brighton and Hove actually exceeded its annual housing targets the last couple of years, but those housing targets are quite small compared to what the need is. So they built around 1,000 new homes into 2022, but right now there are 17,000 people waiting for housing in the city, and so where houses go, it's cities like Brighton and Hove are pretty saturated in terms of land for new builds. So lots of conversations about how to better use existing space, all this sort of stuff. And in the coastal towns, there are tight boundaries. There's the national park, there's the sea. Analysts think that only 50 to 60% of housing needs can ever be met in some of the towns along the coast. So what do we do about that? Planning approvals are high generally, but capacity problems means that actually many things don't get built. I was talking to a house builder a few weeks ago, and he said in their line of work, it can typically take up to 12 years for a site to be identified to then actually people moving in to a new home. Now, needs change quite a lot over 12 years, and people might not see the change that they would like. But of course, we have a beautiful national park that runs as a snake all the way through, and that itself is an independent planning authority with many planning officers and with strict planning laws, which is why national parks exist to protect landscapes and limit homes. But of course, this causes a lot of tension with councils who are told by government they must build houses, but that's quite difficult when the national park says you can't. So what do we do about that? There are extensive protected landscapes, such as the park, but also areas of outstanding natural beauty that, again, understandably heavily restrict development. But that means housing is steered towards brownfield urban regeneration, and that's something we can talk about because that's where mayoral authorities have done a lot of work in the past. We also don't have enough water, even though we have this amazing chalk aquifer. It has been depleted, and in the north of the county, there are legal restrictions on how much more pressure on the water system there can be. So in Crawley and Horsham, it is actually you are not allowed to build any, in some cases, new developments that might require more water usage because simply the water isn't there. So that's something we have to take into consideration in all of this story. But each area has a local plan. So at the moment, every district and borough will have a local plan, and they're trying to address housing and environmental pressures at the same time. If we move to a regional authority, then that might become one pan-regional spatial plan that needs to account for all these different district and borough needs. So what on earth does that look like? And that's what I'd hope to hear from some of you on today. So what's happening elsewhere? So if we move into a combined mayoral authority in Sussex, what can we learn from other parts of the country that have got there already? Well, in South Yorkshire, so I just need to move this icon. South Yorkshire, they secured a partnership with Homes England to deliver 100,000 homes by 2037, and a great deal of that is social housing. So one of the things I know a lot of house builders and some councillors are really interested in is Homes England having a more regional sort of policy, bringing much more investment in social and affordable housing, and we know that that's something that the government sort of unexpectedly put some more money into. West Yorkshire, York and North Yorkshire doing a lot around brownfield development and have unlocked quite a lot of money for that. Again, west of England as well. So brownfield has been really the area of focus. And in West Midland, Liverpool City region, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, they have worked, the mayoral authorities work very closely with the local plans to look at growth corridors, trying to map where people live to where people work, trying to be much more strategic about where housing, transport, infrastructure goes. And the regional perspective has made some of that easier in terms of leveraging in money. So not utopia. A lot of this will be far trickier than the headlines suggest, but things that we can start to think about. So enough of me for a minute. So I'd love to bring in some voices into this. I'm going to start with Julia. Now, Councillor Julia Hilton. That's the first politician we've had on one of these roundtables, actually, or certainly a political leader of Hastings Borough Council. Julia, are you there?
I am, yeah. I'm actually now deputy leader. I've swapped places with Glenn. But yes, because local government reorganisation is taking up so much time, so I'm focusing on that while he gets on with delivery.
Fair enough.
We'll need to do that. Yeah, I think there's quite a lot missing from this and from the wider targets. One of my main concerns is, this 1.5 million housing target doesn't seem to doesn't seem to be thinking about embodied carbon, circular economy, how we actually build these within our carbon budgets, and also how we look at all the the materials, what we can do, what we can build on in terms of the learning we've already got with great B Corps like Boutique Modern and people like that. So I think that's a whole bit of this that isn't in. I had a very quick look at these slides before we joined. And the whole affordability issue. I've just come back from doing some door knocking for our by-election in Wealdon, and I was amazed how much new housing's going on over there. But they're all big, expensive 4-5 bedroom houses. They're not the houses that people in Hastings need.
No.
And also there's nothing in here about the fact that actually we have probably got enough houses for people, but we have an awful lot of holiday homes and an awful lot of Airbnbs, and having the powers to control those more, I think, is a really key thing that at the moment is missing from the mayoral powers, because we're not going to be able to satisfy, we have 600 households in Hastings in temporary accommodation. We're buying properties as fast as we can as a council, because it makes more sense for us to buy. But we haven't got anywhere, and we've got 800, I think, empty homes. Each one of those, we are going to have an empty homes officer. Each one of those takes a long time to unlock, even if we have some capacity. So I think there's these big picture things in these bigger areas where there's probably a lot of brownfield sites in, I can imagine in some of the ex-industrial areas, but I don't think we have that many brownfield sites. So I think we've got to be much more imaginative.
So what does that, so how can we be on the front foot with that imagination, rather than waiting for whatever sort of politician gets elected to come to that conclusion themselves? How can that be modelled? How can some of those ideas be put forward with kind of worked examples of what that could look like?
Well, I think being one of the things we're doing in Hastings with local community groups is beginning to just map all the brownfield sites, all the little difficult, awkward ones that developers won't be interested in, housing associations won't be interested in, but with a bit of help could start unlocking. And I know that sounds, it's nothing like these 100,000 homes by 2037, but those sort of incremental ways of unlocking bits of land. I'm working with, we don't have a council housing stock in Hastings, but we have housing associations where there are land, I think there's land that could be unlocked that they're not necessarily interested in because they can't build 300 houses at once. So I think we need to think about how we map the big picture stuff, the planning and the transport stuff, which I think is key. I think that's one of the huge opportunities in this whole mayoral strategic planning. I think the fact we've had no strategic planning for 20 years maybe is a huge gap, and so that's a big opportunity to actually think about the transport particularly, and how we link places, but how we link them without locking in yet more cars, because we physically can't our roads are already at gridlock quite often. So how we use these opportunities to think strategically across, and I think I haven't got the solutions, but I think it's asking the right questions about how we adapt what mostly the mayoral authorities so far are not in such, I don't think, in such rural areas as West and East Sussex, even though we've got a coastal strip. How do we adapt the model so it works for our smaller and whole mix of communities? And that's the bit that I don't have an answer for, but I think that's where we need to
No, well, I think it's a really important point, and actually, one of the things that might change is in terms of communities having as much of a voice around where some of this infrastructure goes. So I put this question to Steve Nucleus, who couldn't join us today, but he has two hats on: one as a district councillor in Ada, but also as a planning consultant. So he works a lot with developers and housing bodies. And he, just to kind of paraphrase some of the stuff he said, so well, we expect to see a mayor adopt a spatial strategy which will have far-reaching effects on the future shape of the county. He said significantly, the mayor will be able to call in any planning application that he or she wants to take a closer look at, with the suggestion that Any planning application that's submitted on land already allocated in any local plan will no longer need to go to a planning committee for a decision. So those opportunities for people to object or to make the case for why it should or shouldn't happen could be removed. He says that will remove a lot of the anomalies of the planning committees that go against planning officers' advice and can lead to these really long lags that sometimes are unnecessary, but also leads the way for accusations and the reality that local residents might not have so much of a voice when it comes to place shaping and how their communities might evolve. He said it's too early to understand exactly how the makeup of the new authorities and teams will look. But certainly there's talk of parish councils and town councils having greater powers around some of this. But what will that look like? Where will resources be allocated? And crucially, will assets be from district councils that are dissolved be then reallocated to kind of town and parish councils so they become landowners? And how will that be financed? Nobody knows, but these are some of the questions that are being talked about. So thank you to Steve for offering that. So I'm going to open it out a little bit. I can see some people nodding, and Paul, you've got your hand up. So Paul, do you want to come in and maybe introduce where you're from and join in this debate?
Great, thank you. So I'm Paul Steedman. I'm the director for CPRE Sussex, the countryside charity. We work on planning issues, land use issues, and the environment right across Sussex, and we're part of a network of charities that work right across England. I just wanted to build on a few things that both Richard and Julia have mentioned. When we last took a look at the availability of brownfield right across Sussex, which was about 3 years ago, and we're planning to do that again soon. Actually, there's more brownfield in Sussex than you might imagine. So we identified almost 1,000 acres of brownfield sites available at that stage, which would be, enough land for over 23,000 homes, which in the context of even the government's rather ambitious targets, which would see there's pressure on councils to give permissions for a further 73,000 over 5 years, actually that brownfield land is quite significant. So I think we shouldn't sort of feel like, oh, we've got none in Sussex. There are significant pockets of brownfield there. When it comes to those targets, though, I think one of the most critical things that the mayor can do is bring some focus to what kind of housing is it that we want, a point that Julia also mentioned, because the government's targets, it's just any old housing. It's totally tenure blind, but building those 5-bedroom, greenfield mansions doesn't fundamentally address housing waiting lists. It doesn't address the fact that private sector rents in every single borough district are like officially unaffordable. It doesn't tackle the kind of the big housing crisis that we've got. And so if the mayor can see us focusing on building social housing in particular, social housing, starting with brownfield, but also then thinking about all those consents that have already been issued but not built out, we can bring some drive to that. That will go a long way without even touching kind of new sites that have all sorts of environmental implications, because that's the other kind of, that's the bit we haven't got to yet, I suppose, is thinking about, well, what are the implications if we try to build tons of McMansions across the Sussex's green and pleasant land, and for an area that is highly dependent for its economy on culture, on tourism. The landscape of Sussex is a really critical part of the economy. It's not a kind of nice to have. It's essential to how Sussex makes its money work. So we need to make sure that we're thinking about that in the context of environment and economy, and how do those two things fit together. Fundamentally, I think if the mayor can help correct the mistakes, let's put it this way, of 40, 50 years of government that relies very heavily on a handful of very large house building companies to deliver on what are major social requirements, where the alignments between those big building companies and the needs of the people we're talking about on housing waiting lists and so on are fundamentally not aligned. If the mayor can help us think about new public sector-led models for building housing, I think that will be really, really helpful, because we might get the kind of housing we want in the places we need that might actually help fix some of the housing affordability issues without having such a dramatic impact on our landscapes, our wildlife, and so on.
Thank you, Paul. Very, very important. And leads us to our second subject. I'm sorry, we're whipping through. That's the nature of this, but it's pithy insights that we're getting here, and we've already had lots, so that's great. But this landscape, and how important this landscape is, and integral to what we have here. Just to zip through some of these things, we know that most authorities have declared some form of climate emergency, and some are trying to be carbon neutral, even before government targets. There has been some real work done around biodiversity net gain. The park, through its strict planning laws, has made some tangible restoration. We've seen some emissions being brought down within some of the urban sites, not well enough, but some of the deliberation around this has started to do something. But we also know that the current housing stock is incredibly inefficient. And we have a lot of old buildings that are going to be desperately not compliant with our environmental targets very, very soon. Our big success story, or emerging success stories, around a lot of the nature recovery and the work, the Will to Waves work, Sussex Bay. I know we've got people here who can talk about some of these projects. I'm going to play a video contribution in a second by someone who's been working at the heart of a lot of these. And these are growing in reputation and in engagement. So how do we do more of that, so that it's not all oppositional, but all part of, as Paul says, the sort of same Sussex story? What can we learn from elsewhere? Well, regional joined up approaches have made huge differences to how you have a kind of a landscape strategy. We've done some work with the West Midlands Combined Authority on their community green growth investment, where the ambition is that every single person living in the West Midlands is less than 15-minute walk away from a green space. And you do that by funding micro and also bigger grassroots projects. But by doing that at scale and being able to map that across the region, that's had some real effect. You can look at some of these figures around many mayoral authorities are pushing decarbonisation targets to be well before the national ambition. And that's led by, and having a mayor leading that can create a kind of a focal point. And certainly in terms of tree planting, grants and investment to be able to do that has been amplified by being able to do it at a regional level rather than town by town, woodland by woodland. So there are some things to be gained perhaps from a regional perspective that we don't otherwise have. But I'd love to open up some conversation about that in terms of what that looks like in Sussex. I will show a video from Rob Allcroft in a minute, but first I want to bring in Sally Barnard from South East Climate Alliance. I know you've got some thoughts around this.
Yeah, hi. Yes, I'm from the South East Climate Alliance, and we're a coalition of community groups all over. Actually, we cover East and West Sussex, Surrey, Hampshire and Kent. About 140 community groups, and a lot of them are rural, some urban as well. And I've got a particular thought, really, which is that when the new mayors come in, it seems to me that the focus is going to be county-wide, and that I feel we need to be in a situation where we have a Sussex-wide body of some kind that's advocating for climate and nature. That's my feeling. I'm looking towards Surrey, which has got Surrey Climate Commission, which brings together university, the Chamber of Commerce, lots of community groups, the Wildlife Trust, Surrey Wildlife Trust, and they've been up since 2021. And I can see how they're going to be in a good situation when the a Surrey mayor comes along at some point to advocate for climate and nature, and my feeling is that from a seeker angle, that we really need to try and find a way to have a Sussex-based body. And I'm not sure how that would come about, and I wonder who would convene people to have a discussion about that. Well, and I just wanted to raise that as an issue because that's
brilliant.
where I see things going.
Yeah, no, and it seems so simple, and I imagine there is even some people in this call who would have ideas on that. In fact, might bring in kind of Sarah Hadwin or Steve Creed. Don't mind which order you come in. I know you've been talking about some similar angles on this. So Sarah, if you want to say something.
There's such an opportunity here, and I think it's using the will and the ambition. We can't do everything all at once, and I completely hear what you're saying, Sally, and I think it's about tangible outputs. I'd love to address what Julia said of one immediate thing for with the housing is that any new build has to be owner occupied. I think that's a really tangible output to go, without fail, whoever is occupying the new builds, it's not an Airbnb, it's not a holiday let. But to come on to what we're talking about now, the Climate Commission is an absolute no-brainer, and there's such forward-thinking work going on in this area in the nature sector, and it's about coming together as one identity, and that becomes then Sussex's USP. And I think the tangible output of that, because I'm all about, well, how do you evidence that, how do you show, is working with young people, because the future of Sussex is going to be the next generation. We're all sitting on this call and speculating how it's going to land, but we've got 20 or 30 years plus, possibly max. And the truth is, we need to be reaching age 5 through to 20 and embedding it in every aspect of the curriculum, and also supporting schools so they can share the message. Because unless we get them as the future stewards, we're shouting in the wind. So that's my real area of, and to try and advocate, as Sally's doing, how do we do it, to bring together the voices that want to be collaborating on that, because I think there's such an opportunity there to make it matter for kids.
Thanks, Sarah.
Can I say something, Richard?
Yes, of course. Come in, Steve.
I mean, I think all of the points that have been raised so far are really valid. My kind of thinking, I'm quite into the circular economy, is the question about what would be the overall binding thinking that would help all these ideas come together. And I would suggest that thinking about using circular economy as a focus would be a very useful way to bring the issues of housing, carbon reduction, not using up your resources, has a big impact on the houses, all kinds of things like that going on. Somebody mentioned the materials that you use in the properties. And so I would advocate that if the mayor came along and needed something, that would be a great place to start. And you could then have measures that might help him along the way if he wanted to take them up, like biodiversity. Or her, sorry, I'm slipped up there for a minute. Housing, could be what percentage is social, how many net zeros houses there are, how many people are making trips on public transport rather than cars. But, they could be riding their bikes, so I don't want to be too unkind. I think also, because I ride a bike, I think on the other thing is that you could create things like a circular economy task force. I mean, the UK government has a circular economy task force. If Sussex had one, then they would be able to interlink with that, and that would get them started into the same policy areas, or even get a voice at the table that you might not otherwise have. I know a lot of other combined authorities, mayors have been able to set up natural capital investment plans using some of their funding they might get from government or powers they have to raise money, maybe get the private sector involved because they're very worried about their environmental, social, and governance goals these days for investment purposes. Maybe you could have green development zones. You could identify places where right on the edge of existing things, if you can't find enough brownfield sites, and I agree totally with Paul that there's plenty. I'm also the vice chair of a community land trust, so I'm aware of these problems. And finally, I think the biggest challenge of all is going to be about trust with everyone, but particularly with the people that are running it, and use more citizens' assemblies. I mean, if a citizen assembly was involved in putting together a spatial plan or advising or being involved in it, it'd be a much stronger outcome than if it's just top down. And having a dashboard of some sort that they could actually look at and see what was happening on a regular basis would build a lot more trust in the whole thing. So I think those are the kind of things that, thinking about it, if you put something at the core that allows you to talk about all these things, then you can build on from it. And the most important thing is you're not trying to tell somebody what to do specifically. You're trying to set a framework that allows people to innovate and deliver something that we may not even be able to think of. As Sarah said, you know, there could be some people right now in high school who are going to come up with some wonderful ideas we couldn't even think of. And I hope I've got another 20 years, incidentally, Sarah.
and many more besides. Thank you so much. Some really a whole cluster of points there that we'll capture. I just want to play a contribution from Rob Allcroft, who's been a big part of a lot of the nature recovery programs. Can everyone hear this?
Hi, I'm Rob Allcroft. I'm the
Everyone
founder
hear okay?
of Way Forward. We're a social impact strategy consultancy who've worked quite extensively in nature recovery projects in Sussex, including Sussex Bay, where we developed the vision and the brand for that. And also we work a lot on stakeholder engagement for the Sussex local nature recovery strategies. And Richard from Always Possible invited me to reflect on how devolution might impact nature recovery and how a Sussex land, sea and environment story could really be told under the new mayor. Well, my sense is that, like with all matters, devolution is a real opportunity to have a positive impact on nature recovery, because it's an opportunity to do things differently and reflect on how we do them and make improvements, of course. But it's not automatically going to happen. What it will do is it will pull nature out of the day-to-day conversations and will slightly defragment the attention it gets, because it will become a direct function of the mayor's office, and there it will sit alongside growth planning and development. So with a strong champion for nature in that role, there could be a really strong voice for nature and an appetite to tie it into other policy areas and really connect it to tourism and the economy and what have you. However, planning won't change with devolution. Any development management changes will come from the central government's planning reform agenda and the planning and infrastructure bill. And although the mayor, of course, will probably produce a spatial development strategy, and conceivably that could influence the way that local plans are made, which of course then will decide where and when developments take place, ultimately they're going to have to toe the line to the government's agenda on how planning relates to the environment. So the spatial development strategy from the mayor will give us a sense of the what and the why. The how will come from unitary authorities, which will be part of the local government reorganisation. And the how, of course, is a lot more complicated, because there are a lot of local plans, some old, some newly approved, some defunct. So there will be some aggregation and disaggregation of policies. There are likely still to be area teams, but of course certain policies and the way things are done differently in different districts will have to be merged or, as I say, disaggregated, and that's going to cause something of a culture shock. It's really important, though, that we bear in mind throughout, devolution is an opportunity to find solutions. It's not in and of itself a solution. So we need to stay vigilant. We need to do what we can to hold any mayoral candidates to account on their intentions for nature.
I'll leave it there because I think that's the bulk of what Rob's trying to say. But I think there's some really important points there around it not being the solution, but an opportunity to find some. And I think that's what's come through a lot of the points so far. So that brings us to our third section. But I'm aware Julia's got her hand up, so I'd love to bring Julia back in if you've got a quick point on something that's just been said.
It was more, it was picking up something that we passed a bit, but I think it's really key on this, is that actually to do all this, to do the circular economy, to really be successful with nature recovery, and it picks up something that Sarah said, is skills and training and how we bed the opportunities in. So not just in school, but that career pathway for people into landscape management. If we're going to do BNG, we've got to do it well. How we share the skills we've already got to, you know, how are we going to make sure that those landscapes do improve over 30 years, which is what you're meant to do. And how do we make sure we've got the skills to understand how we could be using local materials? Because from my perspective as a councillor, you know, there are lots of people doing good stuff, but trying to find them in your patch or trying to share that information when money still comes with silly deadlines and stuff is really tricky to keep that innovation. And I just wanted to add that into the mix, that I think is, which I know is an opportunity of the mayor, the whole skills thing, but it needs to be built in to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's how, you know, the third bit here is, you know, what are the trade-offs that maybe can work to the advantage of this? Or what are those opportunities, you know, in this broad growth agenda that actually some of these solutions can come from, you know, whether that's through skills or whether that's through the tourism strategy or whether that's some of the strategic housing stuff. So I'd like to bring in I can bring in Paul from Hanover Action. I know you've got you had a question that you gave to us.
Thank you. Yes, I've actually forgotten what the question was. Could you remind?
We're asking about ecotourism as a sort of solution, I think.
Yes. Yes, it was more about how can, as I recall, the Sussex Mayor help kind of boost ecotourism across the whole county, using kind of urban centres where, you know, for example, in Brighton, we get a huge amount of day trippers, but we don't get multi-stay visitors. And it's about connecting up the kind of infrastructure of Sussex Bay, South Downs into urban areas around Sussex to help promote kind of green tourism. And how can more of a strategic kind of thought about that, getting people to, rather than focus on day trips, think about longer stays within the Sussex region as well, in terms of all those kind of benefits of using the local infrastructure, not traveling or flying somewhere else to enjoy the amazing countryside we've got. But actually, how can we make Sussex, you know, kind of strapline like Sussex First for people who live in Sussex to have holidays and connect up the rural areas with urban centres and things like that as well. So it was more kind of thinking strategically about how that approach can be done, rather than just at the standard tourism thing, like going to high cost, high venues, but actually using some of our natural infrastructure that we have, whether it's the Bay, the Downs, which is.
And I want to bring in Kevin Smith, who has been convening something called Brighton United, which is particularly trying to regalvanise how marginalised voices shape all of these sorts of you know, decisions bottom up. And there's lots here which is around, you know, communities that are going to be affected by this, but have no say. We've talked a lot about young people and education, but also, you know, we know that Black and Asian communities are often excluded from a lot of nature-based programming. Kevin, what would you like to say?
I guess I'm mostly wondering how to make sure that we're engaging marginalized communities and making sure that the opportunity is communicated in a way that they can see themselves, or we can see ourselves, you know, kind of as part of the plan, and that we're actually factored in, and that those voices, our voices, are represented through this process. And just as I'm brainstorming or kind of taking on board the concerns and the needs, and so how could potentially something like maybe mentoring and engaging the youth, but in a way that incorporates environmental issues. How can we get the younger generations to be a part of the dialogue, and then see themselves in the solution, and maybe collaborate in some way. And so, yeah, that's my main concern. How are we sharing information so that people see themselves as part of the process, And then how are we involving marginalized communities at the same time?
Yep. And comes back to Steve's point around, citizens' assemblies as a tool for being able to, potentially help with the spatial plan, while actually getting communities for whom housing is absolutely a critical issue, to be able to help shape what that policy might look like would be really important. Some great questions coming in on the chat. I know Anne's had a question about how do we prevent sort of developers from land banking. I mean, I think that's a very big question that is probably one that we can't solve. But I wonder if some of these new policy changes and some of these spatial plans could disincentivize it. I'm going to bring in Catherine Fisher now. I don't know if you've got an answer to that, Catherine, but I know that you've been thinking about how to manage some of the trade-offs between priorities and outcomes, or you've got some questions about that or some thoughts.
I think I've got questions more than answers, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, I think it builds on the point that Sally was making, and I think that Sarah's making, about this need for sort of this kind of holistic view. Really, if you take all these pieces in isolation, you're not really thinking about the trade-offs between them, and what's good for. Sometimes what's good for nature might not be good for other aspects of sort of environmental concerns. So I guess it was thinking about how those trade-offs can be managed. Now, echo what Steve and Kevin were just talking about in terms of trust and engagement and involvement, and thinking about what the mechanisms for that will be in the new system, whatever that looks like. It feels absolutely fundamental that people are involved in it and don't feel done to in whatever happens, and that we have proper ways of managing those trade-offs in kind of sensible ways. There are stuff, for example, energy generation, competition for water. If we listen to the news this morning about the need for water for cooling to cool data centers, you also need water for for all sorts of other things, even electric hydrogen generation and so on. There's all these competing demands that need to be weighed up, and a lot of them at the moment, they can't really be done at a national level, and they can't be done at a unitary authority level at those kinds of decisions. What decisions are best made where, and how do we do that effectively? And I don't have answers, I'm afraid, Richard, so I'm going to hand that back.
No, well, but these are important framings, and there's a brilliant company called Deep Green who actually have a big presence in Brighton, who do build data centers. That's how they make their money. But every data center they build is next to a swimming pool, so all of the heat generated from the data centers power quite big public leisure pools, and they've got technology that sort of siphons that heat, so to ensure that all of it's renewable. And they've got this great project in Exeter. So some of that innovation, I think, could be really championed. Anne, I'm going to bring you in, Anne, because I sort of brushed past your comment, but I'm sure you'd like to bring a voice to the table.
Thank you. Now, I was actually going to raise a different issue because, listening to us all, I think there's fundamental agreement amongst us, and there's some very interesting possibilities of solutions, whatever. But it's assuming that we get a mayor with those kind of principles. We could get a mayor that is very different, a mayor that is very much into building everywhere, building roads, etc. And that is, for me, a great worry. It really isn't a foregone conclusion that we're going to have a mayor with the same priorities as us.
Well, and we'll have a mandate from central government probably to do that regardless of their politics. So I think you're absolutely right, but it's about how all of these things make all of that much more, so it solves multiple problems rather than just the build, and how can we do it smartly. So chance to bring anybody else in that's not had a chance to speak. I don't know if Gavin from the Brighton Improvement District, really good to get your perspective from a sort of city centre, this tussle between growth and sustainability, or Kathy from Climate Change Brighton.
Hi, Richard. Sorry,
All right, I'll put you on the spot, Gavin.
No, that's all right. Yeah, so my name's Gavin Stewart. I'm the Chief Exec of the Business Improvement District in Brighton City Centre, and also look after the Business Growth Board for Brighton and Hove as well, and have my finger on a number of different pies and community groups and organisations as well. Interesting conversation there around the visitor economy as well, and how we can move forward with that all in a more circular overnight stay focus as well. One of the main problems that we've got in the city, and I know I'm talking to the converted and everyone's well aware of this, but there's something around certainly the housing element and housing inaffordability in somewhere like Brighton and Hove, but also in terms of business unit provision as well within the city. So there's something for me within all this conversation about inward investment and how we attract more people to our region, but do that in a sustainable and environmentally protective way. At the moment, we are actively losing a significant amount of international inward investment to other areas of the country because they've just got much better propositions in place, and they're also building or able to build follow-on space for businesses. Now, somewhere like Brighton and Hove has an amazing 91% of our businesses are SMEs. We've got a really wonderful entrepreneurial spirit in the city. One of the big issues, though, is that we don't have anywhere for those individuals to move on to. And so we then end up losing really great startups just out of the city, but potentially outside of the region as well. So there's something there. And while we're talking about housing, I think we also need to talk about business space within that same context as well, and how we manage that best going forwards. Yeah, I think that was all I wanted to add to the conversation.
Thank you. No, I didn't tell you I was bringing you in, but that's a really important point. Yes, I don't know. Oh, hello.
Hi, sorry, Kathy from Climate
Hi,
Change.
Kathy.
I've got a question. I just wanted to pick up on Anne's point. So there are lots of great ideas here, and in a way, sort of, you could create a manifesto. I'm just interested in what possibilities there are to kind of influence the conversation, other than through, the normal political party route. As it's, the elections are coming up pretty swiftly. So I'm just curious to know what more knowledgeable people are thinking about that. And then also, as well as a conversation with the actual elections of the mayor, any influence or sort of oversight bodies are there opportunities to create spaces for, maybe it's through these assemblies or what have you. So I think there's two things of actually influencing the process and the selection or the debate around the election. And then also, given if there's a worst case scenario, how do we try and create spaces?
Oh, just lost you there at the end. But yeah, no, I think it's two really important points, and one that is happening in every sector and with every particular sort of interest area at the moment is this: where are we in the queue in order to put our sort of 3, 4, 5, 10 priorities in front of the mayoral candidates, of whom we don't even know who they are yet, and it's going to be quite a short window of that campaign. I think the reason we're here and the reason this conversations happening is, the more that we can join up that regional voice so that there's kind of one strong pitch for some of these good ideas, rather than these political actors having to have sort of 20, 30, 40 different things thrown at them, and then they've kind of got an excuse to ignore all of them. If there's something that's compelling and joined up and has lots of signatories to it, then I think that can go quite far. So we're really open to how we can facilitate that. And in terms of the accountability board, well, I think that a lot of that's to be, it works differently in different areas. I don't think there's an awful lot of diktats on exactly how accountability structures. So that's something that should be negotiated, debated, and put forward when it's clear. Certainly, how once the new unitary authorities are carved up, exactly how accountability for the mayor is going to look. I think there are opportunities for us to try and shape what that looks like. Whether people will listen, I don't know. So we've got just a couple of minutes left. I don't know if any points that have been put, such great things in the chat. We'll obviously capture all of this, and there's links and there's some really good examples. So that's brilliant. We'll capture all of that. Don't know if anybody wanted to add in maybe One or two more quick thoughts. This is a whistle-stop tour. That was what's promised. It's the start of a conversation, but there's a dozen great things here that can all be followed up with. One or two quick points before I wrap up, or
just a quick one from me, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Just to say, I'm really grateful, Richard, that you've kickstarted these conversations, but really keen to move them to make sure we have not just a Brighton and Hove focus, and what also feels like quite a West Sussex focus. So being at the other end in Hastings, how we can broaden these conversations out so that it feels relevant to some of the other areas, because it's such a big area of Sussex. And I just wonder, I've asked our chamber if they'll do something, and I think hopefully they're talking to you, but our Chamber of Commerce, but how we expand on this. And I'm just, yeah, real great, hugely grateful that you've initiated this, but yeah.
It's it's a start, and there's a lot to do, and yes, and there are, there's a million people not in this space than are, but I hope what we've got here, is actually some really informed, bright, sparky people who've got some ideas that will resonate with those that we can then get this out to. But yes, of course, I think a lot of, we're looking at roadshows, we're looking at in-person events. Yes, we're talking to Hastings Chamber and a number of groups out there. I think there's loads of opportunity to galvanise and to build. But it's a collective thing. So if anyone wants to take up the mantle, or someone wants to convene another follow-on from this, we're really happy to help provide some of the infrastructure around it. But it's not all ours to own, of course. So yeah, open to ideas. Okay, well we'll close off there. But brilliant contributions. Thank you so much for taking part. We've got one next week looking at tech, particularly looking at what a digital tech playbook might look like for the region. And actually, that's not just about tech industry, that's about how technology can help with the things that we've been talking about today. How can there be much smarter use of data and skills to be able to support much more ability to do things efficiently and with shared knowledge and innovation. And then we're also going to be looking at arts and culture as a regional story, and then looking at manufacturing with quite a big focus on sustainability in manufacturing and the link between land and making. That's going to be quite a big part of it, as well as the sort of high growth manufacturing. So brilliant thoughts, questions. Sorry not be able to address everything or even half of something, but some really important provocations and points there that we will share. And hope to continue these conversations with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.